It's no surprise that unfortunately, the women's divisions in the UFC are known to be the most boring. Apart from the champions and probably a couple contenders in the top 5, majority of MMA fans do not even know who the top 10 in women's divisions are. And this is just mainly has to do with the interest. Most people are just not interested in the women's division because they've been criticized as being boring fights and overall bathroom breaks. And that got me thinking, what can be done to make women's divisions more exciting, women's fights more exciting, and just overall pay-per-view worthy? Now, what came to mind first is the WNBA versus the NBA. And the reason for this is because I noticed that they have actual rule set changes. They play with a smaller ball in the WNBA and they play shorter minutes. And I feel like the same could be applied in women's MMA specifically for the UFC. And what I propose is that you keep the rounds the same at 3 rounds, but instead of 5-minute rounds, make it 3-minute rounds. And same thing can be applied for the championship fights. Keep it 5 rounds, but 3-minute rounds. And what this pretty much does is what I feel like it could probably push the pace a lot faster because now there's a shorter time limit. The women know that they have to get certain things done within that time limit. And just overall, it might disencourage stalling. For example, I know that's a big issue with especially in women's grappling is stalling. That might negate that. And another rule set change. This is not really a rule set change, but an octagon change. Now, before I say what I want to say, I don't know how the logistics would work on this, but I'm sure that the UFC could manage, and that's a smaller octagon. Whenever there's a women fight going on, I suggest that the UFC make the octagon smaller. Specifically, what I would like is, you guys know that mini octagon, like insignia within the octagon that's surrounded by the monster? Close it off till there. In combination with the shorter minutes and a shorter amount of space, that definitely would push the action. Now, this could also be a double-edged sword because this might just promote grappling and just stalling. But hopefully, I like to be optimistic, but I think it would push the pace and make women's fights a lot more exciting. And another change that I would make to make the fights more exciting, in addition to the smaller octagon and a smaller time frame, is the bonus pay. I suggest that for women's fights only, increase the bonus from 50K to either 75K or even 100K. If the women get a knockout bonus, that's deserving. They get a 100K bonus to 75K bonus. Same thing, performance bonus. And I suggest bring back the submission bonus because this would incentivize them finishing opponents and having more exciting fights because they'll push the pace knowing that that's on the line, that they could get a 75K bonus or a 100K bonus. They would definitely push the pace, definitely make everything a whole lot more exciting. And one other rule set change that I would make, or I would suggest I would say, is to somehow, in the rule set for women's MMA, this should honestly be just in the UFC in general, is to put more emphasis on striking, on significant strikes, because a lot of fights, in the women's division, they'll win off just like the pity patch strikes, just jabs, not really a lot of power, just volume punching. And I admit, I love volume punching. I mean, look at Max Holloway, volume puncher, exciting fights he puts on, but somehow it doesn't translate well in the women's UFC. And I'm not sexist by all means. The proof is right in front of us. It just doesn't work. So having a rule set where significant strikes triumph everything. I know that the rule sets say damage triumphs everything, and there's supposed to be effective grappling all throughout the UFC rule set, MMA rule set, whatever you want to call it. They barely implement that. So that's why I kind of left this out for one of the last points I wanted to make, just because they could barely keep the rule set under control as it is. Another thing that I would say that'll make women's divisions a whole lot exciting. This is actually up to the fighters, And I would say marketing. The last big marketed women's fighter in general, I would say, is Valentina Shevchenko, a bit. Alexa Grasso, that's mainly because of her being Mexican and having the Mexican fan base. Amanda Nunes and Ronda Rousey, which Ronda Rousey was the biggest out of all of them. I feel like if a lot of the women fighters had a lot more personality to them, they're on social media a lot more, even trash talking, and not the cringe trash talk. If they actually trash talk their opponents, have some beef, have something brewing, it will make, even if the fight's boring, people would still tune in. I mean, look at Colby Covington. He is he's the biggest fraud in UFC history. I don't care. He's the biggest fraud in UFC history. I never considered him as championship material, but he has a big mouth, and that allowed him to get more pay-per-view sales. And I'll be honest, I'm a Colby Covington hater, but I still tune into his fights just because he did make things interesting. The press conferences were entertaining as hell, and his fight style is not entertaining whatsoever. Barely gets any finishes, but I would still tune in. So I feel like if there was a lot of more villains specifically, or big personalities in the women's divisions, it'll be a game changer. And the last, but certainly not least, is the simple, which is better talent acquisition. And I know that the UFC is most definitely on top of this, but I feel like they should be on top of this a little more. Look at ONE FC. Even the women's striking there is just, they're incredible strikers there. So I feel like they should encourage trades. How the UFC did the Ben Askren and Demetrius Johnson trade. That I feel like there should be more trades like that to get better talent acquisition. I know they lack a lot of grapplers in ONE FC, and the UFC lacks a lot of effective strikers in women's MMA, in the women's UFC divisions. So why not just encourage some trades going on? I don't see how that hurts anybody. Last time it happened with the Ben Askren, we got Masvidal, one of the best runs I've ever seen in my life. 1 year runs I've ever seen in my life. And now we just got it wasn't really a trade, but they just acquired MVP, who just put up a phenomenal performance against Holland. So things like that. The UFC wants nothing to do with Bellator or ONE FC, and wants to be their own thing, the main premier organization, and that's fine. That's fine. That's just the competitive nature of it. But encouraging a little more trades, getting more talent acquisition from other organizations, it just benefits the UFC in the long run. But that about wraps it up on what I think the UFC should do to make the women's division more exciting, more viewer friendly, more eyes on the sport. And I want to reiterate, I'm not sexist in any means, and I'm not just saying that just to shit on women's MMA, because like I mentioned previously, the proof is right in front of us. They're not as exciting. Many people consider them as bathroom breaks, and I'm guilty of that as well. But I feel like little mini changes like the ones I've mentioned, even if they don't want to do all the changes I've mentioned, even just small changes like the time rule changes, make the time limit smaller, I feel like it would make a big difference. But like always, let me know what y'all think. What rules set changes, or just different things regarding women's MMA and the UFC in general, would you like to see that you would think will make them more exciting?
Damn, son, where'd you find this?